Hello, and thank you for joining us for this special Gleaner Editors Forum. I'm Damian Mitchell. Well, it's now 17 days since Jamaica announced its first case of the coronavirus, and since then the figure has increased to 26. With that have come several necessary restrictions. The result, a downturn in the economy and a projection for a 3% decline this year. So just how is the government seeking to cushion that impact on you, and was it proactive enough? Over the next 30 minutes, we'll hear from the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke, on these and other matters. So, Dr. Clarke, if you can recap in about 2 minutes, how is the government seeking to cushion this impact on the barber, the hairdresser?
We're doing so much. I think, Damon, it's going to take it's hard to do it in all 2 minutes, but let me be as quickly as I can. The government is focused on subsidizing people and not necessarily profits. So our intervention is directed towards providing some kind of wage subsidy to those who are most affected. We're doing that through a number of programs. Our overall program, we're calling the CARE program, the COVID allocation of resources for employees, and it has several components. The first one is the Best Cash program, which is business employee support with the transfer of cash, where we will be incentivizing employers in the tourism sector and tours and attractions to retain a connection with their employees even if they don't come to work, and as long as they keep their employees on the payroll with some amount of compensation, we will support those businesses with an amount of $9,000 per fortnight over the next 3 months. The businesses have to apply. The second one is the Set Cash program, where we will be supporting employees with the transfer of cash. And now this one is open to employees across all sectors who are formally employed and whose employers remit statutory deductions on their behalf. For these employees, if they are laid off or made redundant or terminated, they will be able to apply online, and we would have to verify that indeed they were employed before the 10th of March and that they indeed were laid off. And once that verification has been made and they will be entitled to receive an amount of $9,000 per fortnight for the months of April, May, and June, provided they apply on time. You have to, and we'll be going forward. So if you apply in May, you'll only receive for May and June. If you apply in June, you only receive for June.
And this application process opens?
This application process will open on the 9th of April, and it will be online. The verification for employees who are laid off in this regard will need to be supported by the employers uploading information on the employees who have been laid off in a form called a P45. We will be working with employers through various umbrella organizations to ensure, PSOJ, the Hotel Association, and so forth, to ensure that they know how to file these forms, which they should be doing anyway, and that they indeed file them so that their employees or their laid off employees can benefit. We will also be transferring $1.1 billion to the PATH program so that the PATH beneficiaries who would normally receive 2 payments in the period April to June will now receive 3 payments in the period April to June, which will increase their inflows by 50% over this period of time. We will be providing grants to MSMEs who file taxes. If you file taxes for 1920, and there's still a few hours to do so, and your sales, meaning your revenues, are less than $50 million, and your tax filings, your payroll returns indicate that you have employees, we will be making a one-time transfer to those small businesses in the amount of $100,000. The average small business employs 2, 3, 4 people, so there's a one-time transfer of $100,000. For persons who are informally employed and who are affected, craft vendors, for example, there's no crafts being sold at the market vendors. Those individuals are registered with their municipal organizations. They have stall numbers. They're required to pay fees on a weekly basis. For craft vendors and market vendors who are in good standing with the municipal authorities, they will be required to fill out a form providing their personal details, their stall number, and other information, a photo that's been certified, their TRN. And once we're able to verify that information with the information that the municipal organization has, then we will have a payment for them.
And what's there for the coconut man who would not be vending in a market and probably would not have been registered as a vendor?
Right, so the persons who are, we're going to, this is because we're dealing with taxpayers' money, this is your money, this is the money of the persons watching online, we have a duty, an obligation to ensure that that money is transferred in a way that can be subject to scrutiny and where that can be verified, that the beneficiaries are people who are actually deserving of it. So identity becomes important. Anyone can say, I am this. We have to have a means of verifying that people are who they claim to be. As long as we can substantiate, we'll be working, there are many social intervention programs in Jamaica, and we will be working to support those programs so that they can provide. So I'll give you an example. There's a poor relief program in the Ministry of Local Government that deals with persons who are homeless, persons in shelter, persons on the street, and elderly people in infirmaries. We'll be transferring $150 million on top of what is already in the budget for those persons, and they have means of identifying people who are beneficiaries and so forth. The challenge is just verification, and we want to be in a position to report to the Jamaican people that those who have benefited are those who are deserving. Undoubtedly, you will have people who try to beat the system, and we're going to try to make that a hard thing to do.
You mentioned that people will need to make their applications online, but still there are so many people who would be impacted who would not have access to the internet.
So
where do they go?
So online applications will only be required for certain categories. So for best cash and set cash, definitely online. For barbers, hairdressers, and so forth, those categories, bars, those will be online. For craft vendors and market vendors, we're likely to have a manual form that we have market managers in municipal corporations, and they will oversee that. For other categories, it might be necessary to have manual as well. But we want the vast majority in numbers to be online, because that allows for much greater accountability, much greater transparency, and it allows for much better governance.
So have you worked out where they would go to make these applications?
Yes, as I said, I gave you two examples. For the market vendors and the craft vendors, it would be through the municipal corporation. For other categories as well, municipal corporations and possibly the Ministry of Labor. We are working with umbrella groups. This is a rapidly unfolding sort of pandemic, and we are, as the situation changes, we will adjust.
How do you respond to critics, Dr. Clarke, that there might have been a lapse in judgment? You were presenting your budget on the same day Jamaica announced its first case of the coronavirus and gave back $18 billion to tax-paying Jamaicans, knowing that the recovery package may cost even more than that 14.
You know what? There's a
18
preparation is better than good luck. And because the government of Jamaica has been aggressive in harnessing resources to pay down on debt, right? We have been taking companies, listing companies on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, giving people a chance to own and raising revenue for the government. We have been reintegrating public bodies into their parent ministries and harvesting the cash. Because of that, we were in a position, in the greatest crisis that Jamaica has faced, to find fiscal space. Had we not done that, had we not accumulated reserves that we could have used to reduce the primary surplus without affecting debt trajectory up until then, I would not have been in a position to set aside at the time $7 billion of space. You have to think back, when have you seen a budget where it has been presented and we have said, look, this amount of money we're not even going to allocate yet, because we see a train coming, we know we're going to have to respond to that train, so we're setting aside $7 billion. So that I can come in the closing of the budget. There's no scrambling, there's no reallocation, nothing extraordinary is required. All I need to do now is to allocate that which I've reserved. Now, thank God that is the case. I'm not seeking to claim any sort of credit for it, but I think you should at least recognize that we were able, in the presentation of the budget, to carve out an amount that we said we're not telling, we don't know where this is, sorry, we have this amount that we have carved out. It's $7 billion. It's for a response to COVID. This thing is escalating at such a pace. We're not going to say whether it's for transportation or for health or for security or for education. We're just putting $7 billion aside. And it put us in a position where the following week, 7 days later, we're able to come out, having increased it from 7 to 10, and spell out a very detailed package that addresses the vast majority of Jamaicans who are affected.
What should we therefore expect in the upcoming supplementary budget that you would be seeking to have Parliament approve?
Right, so we are, for the supplementary budget, for the supplementary, supplementary estimate, we're going to table in the first, as soon as possible, in the new year. What we'll be seeking to do there is to actually, what I've announced needs to be in the budget. It's not in the budget, it goes in the budget by way of a supplementary. We have the space for it, so what we'll be doing there is simply passing the legislation that gives effect to these measures. What we'll also be doing is looking at the expenditure that we have and reprioritizing, reallocating. In the light of COVID, you'll understand that things that we would have ordinarily had to spend on in April, May, and June, we may not. I mean, they're trivial and simple examples. If there was going to be an event at the stadium that would have cost X, that's not going to happen in April, May, and June anymore. It's going to happen later. As a simple example. But there are other examples of bigger ticket items that will not be required in April, May, and June that we will reallocate and move. And then any space that's generated will be balanced, against expectations for, changes in revenue, as well as, supplementing the response that will be required for this COVID pandemic.
We have some questions which are coming in that I need to put to you, but
Sure.
Just before that, what's the worst case scenario for the economy? What's the best case scenario?
That's a very good question. This is unfolding at such a rapid pace that it would be foolhardy of me to try and spell out, what the worst case is. There's a lot that the world community doesn't know about the science of the virus, and until we know much more about the science of the virus, I wouldn't hesitate to spell that out. What we do know is that we are going to have a massive economic hit as far as GDP is concerned, that the first quarter of this upcoming financial year, between March and June, tourism will be virtually standstill, which will mean a dramatic reduction on the year before, and that will have a drag on the rest of the economy. We do know that demand will be constrained by the fact that people are at home and economic activity is curtailed, and it's quite likely that some of those effects will persist into subsequent quarters.
Well, here's a question from Angela Robinson. She's asking, is there any consideration being given to people who will not be on salaries while they await their pension? The wait is usually very long, she says. In this time of crisis, I think that some special arrangements should be made. So far, I have not heard anything mentioned. This is from Angela Robinson.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What she's speaking to is that due to the fact that processes are manual for pension applications, people apply, and sometimes it takes a while for them to be approved to receive a pension. And she's asking what can happen in the interim. That's something that I need to take back and give a response to at a later date.
Well, since we're on the matter of pension, a lot of companies are investing in the stock market, for example, as part of the defined contribution pension scheme, which essentially means that what's in your account is what's going to be accounting for your pension going on. Is the government seized of this reality, and how is it seeking to protect those people who may be going home this year on retirement but would have been hit by virtue of the declines in the stock market, for example?
Yeah, so the good news is that this crisis is, though the effects of it may last for some time, the crisis in itself is temporary in nature. We can't say exactly when it's going to end, but it's certainly temporary in nature. And investing for retirement is something that you do over the course of your lifetime, and that's why it's important to do so prudently over a long period of time. no doubt there are persons who are retiring this year who would have their account balances sort of hit by this this economic shock. I mean, I would say though that as you get closer to retirement, the guidance always is, certainly if you are with one of the major institutions that manage pension funds, the guidance is that the allocation, shifts as you get closer to retirement. You should not, if you're going to retire in a month, your balances should not be in stocks. They should be in more fixed income instruments by then. When you're 35, or when you're 40, or even 45, even 50, yes, you can have weightings towards equities. But as you get closer to retirement, the weightings should change.
So you don't expect, therefore, that there
No,
should
I'm not
be...
saying I don't expect. I'm just saying what ought to obtain. I'm saying what ought to obtain.
Well, here's another pension question. I don't know, the pensioners are on you this morning. This is from Geddes Austin. She says the Ministry of Labor is not helping NIS pensioners at this time. What we would want is an increase. Is that possible?
The NIS pension is normally increased on a periodic basis, and I believe the time for that is any day now. That's really, in the joint portfolio of the Minister of Labour and Social Security and myself. She would sort of make a recommendation. The Ministry of Finance would look at it, and given that it involves someone other than myself, I'd prefer to refrain from saying too much about that at this time. But suffice to say that these are reviewed periodically, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be reviewed shortly.
Dr. Clarke, how far is the government willing to go in respect of businesses? Will it, for example, impose any mandates on any business in respect of opening or continue to remain open?
Well, there are many aspects to this pandemic. One is the health aspect and what the government will be doing and is doing to protect the health of the Jamaican people. And then there's the sort of economic and other aspects of it. As far as the health aspects are concerned, that's not in my portfolio. But suffice it to say, I think the guidance from the government has been very clear, and I think the Prime Minister has signaled his intention or willingness to escalate the measures should the conditions require. In doing so, we'd have to take careful consideration about the structure of the economy and services that are provided by private sector entities that are probably very important to have open regardless of the circumstances. But I wouldn't want to jump ahead and jump into an area that's not one I'm responsible for.
Well, the credit unions have been criticizing you. They say that the order makes specific mention of banks. They too are a large institution, and there's no specific mention of the credit unions, which means that they have to abide by the general rules. I mean, is this not a concern that the government should be taking on?
Well, I'm not sure they're entirely correct. I believe it speaks to financial institutions, but I stand to be corrected on that. This is moving at a rapid pace, Damien. Just by, if you look at what's happening in the United States, where I think it gives you a sense of how quickly this is moving. Between last week and the week before in the United States, we are seeing sort of exponential changes, and governments around the world are putting in place measures quickly. I mean, I think Jamaica has been ahead of the curve with the measures that we've put in place. Doesn't mean that it's perfect or that everything is 100% on the day we do it, but where there are gaps, you've seen that the government has been willing to clarify or to correct or to update. And I think that's what the Jamaican people want. They want to see decisive, strong action. But if that decisive, strong action has a gap, they want to see government come forward and correct that gap, update it, revise it. And I think that's what we've been seeing over the past 2 weeks.
Well, since you talk about putting measures in place, is a return to the IMF a consideration?
Jamaica is a member of the IMF, like 188 other countries in the world. And the IMF provides balance of payment support to countries that are in need of that support. At this point in time, Jamaica, has over $3 billion in net reserves, $3.6 billion in gross reserves, and at this point in time, Jamaica has the reserves and the cushion to be able to respond. I would, returning to the IMF, just to clarify for your listeners, I mean, what you mean by that is returning to a program relationship with the fund.
Borrowing relationship.
Right, borrowing relationship.
At the very least, a standby agreement.
A standby agreement. Okay, so the IMF has many products, and there are products that it has where it can transfer resources that does not require a program or borrowing relationship. Well, doesn't require a program relationship. Clearly, the products that it has where it transfers resources outside of a program, the resources it would transfer are smaller than the resources that would be available if it were a program relationship. So just to say that, Jamaica, like other countries in the Caribbean, could access resources that are outside of a program relationship. In terms of a program relationship, however, at this point in time, we, Jamaica, with what we have here, with the measures and the buffers that we have, with the access to potential financing from other multilaterals, should that become necessary, we don't see that. That's not something that is something that we leave open, an option that we leave open, but at this point in time, it's not on the cards.
Has not been discussed.
At this point in time, it's not on the cards.
Meaning has not been discussed.
No, that question is loaded because it means that you're not thinking about it. I mean, I've thought about all of the options. All the options are on the table. All the options are on the table. But at this point in time, that's not on the cards because of the position that Jamaica is in today. Clearly, if things were to deteriorate, one could always relook at options, but I'm saying that all options remain on the table, but that particular one is not one that's on the cards.
So the Gleaner has proposed a CARICOM plan that would see CARICOM approaching G7 countries to earmark for what he calls rescue funds for the Caribbean. Is there any value in that sort of a proposal?
I mean, there's value in unity, and there is value in presenting a common sort of face and making a common appeal to international and multilateral organizations. And I would say that to date, the Caribbean has been acting in unity. I've participated in conference calls with finance ministers from around the region with our multilateral counterparts. We've had conference calls with the Inter-American Development Bank. We've had conference calls with the IMF. We've had a number of such engagements. So we're acting in unity. But the precise sort of the devil is in the detail. The nature of the proposal, has to consider that there are other countries in the world as well, right? That not just us. And as compared with other countries in the world, the Caribbean is an area of relatively high per capita GDP. If you look at Barbados and Trinidad and other countries, though, in the OECS, even Jamaica at $5,000, there are many countries in the world that have much less. So we would have to articulate, a position based on other forms of vulnerability, which we're in a position to do. And already, the CARICOM and Caribbean countries have been making overtures that stress the uniqueness of small island states that have vulnerabilities that are not necessarily reflected in per capita GDP. Right? Per capita GDP is a useful measure, but it does not incorporate all aspects of vulnerability.
Yes, I understand. Here's a question coming in from Twitter, and this is coming from Omi, and I guess going back to the first question that you sought to have answered. Are the free zone companies included in this cushion with layoff? And if yes, what's the process between the companies and the government?
So all companies, well, let me rephrase. Best cash, where the money goes to the company, is for companies in the tourism sector, who are the hardest hit. There are few companies that will not feel an effect, but we are not stepping into companies where the revenue impact is 10% of revenues or 20%. In the tourism industry, everybody knows that the revenue impact for the first few months of next financial year is going to be 80 or 90%. So the best cash is for them. For the set cash, where we are supporting employees who have been laid off, as I mentioned earlier, employees from any sector. So whether they're working for the Free Zone company or other companies, they'll be eligible to apply.
And here's another one. This is from Rail Joan G. She says, "Good morning. My question to Dr. Nigel Clarke. What about new contract workers who did not get a chance to file taxes because it was too early, but the project was terminated early because of COVID?"
Right, so there are a number of nuances.
Yes.
Number of nuances. We're going to have, there's going to be a call center set up where we'll be fielding calls from applicants or prospective applicants, and there'll be a number of exceptions, and we're going to have to find a way to treat with those exceptions. As I said in my budget speech, when the future is foggy and the path is uncertain, one has to be guided by principles in your decision making, and those principles will lead you out of, lead you forward. So the principles that will govern our intervention are principles of transparency, accountability, verification, and so forth. And we would apply those principles to cases such as those.
I know you've answered this before, but I think it's important to read it because the security guards feel left out. Michael Shan, he says, "Can you ask him how we don't hear anything about security guards? What have security guards done to everyone why no one cares about us?"
No. Our program is called CARE, and the essence of our program is that the government cares, we care. Security guards work for firms in the North Coast, in the tourism belt, and security guards are among those who are likely to be affected. Security guards who are terminated or laid off will be able to apply for a set cash transfer under the same terms and conditions.
On Instagram, Kifa Davis says, "What is the economic burden? Well, is the economic burden a threat to COVID-19 patients? How are the restrictions on bars, taxes, etc. Economically justified when the number of healthy persons who could be at work as normal, thereby keeping the economy more healthy, far outnumber the number of COVID-19 patients?"
Sorry, it's a long question.
Yes,
It went in a different
essentially
direction.
the point I'm getting from this is that he's saying that the government has sought to close down bars and places of amusement when healthy people could be there helping with the economy. So she's asking, how is that justified?
But healthy people could be at the bars.
At the bars and places of amusement.
Well, I think she's probably misunderstanding the reason why the bars have been closed. The reason why they've been closed is that congregations of persons greater than a certain number increase the risk of a transfer of the virus. The Dominican Republic went from flat cases up to 492, and the reports are that there were two. The Prime Minister said this yesterday. There were two events. There was a fundraiser for a popular person in part of Domrep that had several people, a couple hundred people, and that event alone, because there's someone who had it, it meant that a lot of people got it, and there was a wedding as well. And we've seen that one of our cases, somebody went to a funeral, and it's going to the funeral, 5 other people got it. So the restrictions on bars and restaurants arise because those are venues that people, Jamaicans, we like to congregate, right? But just to protect Jamaicans and protect our health, we're saying, just for now, just for a period of time, let us close the bars and restaurants to slow the spread of the virus.
Time is leaving us very fast. We have a couple more minutes to go. And Javon Israel Campbell on Facebook is asking whether it's possible for banks and credit unions to cut interest rates and remove late fees on loans and mortgages.
Well, banks are privately owned, but I've seen them step up to respond to their customers at this time of crisis. I know that there are financial institutions who are in dialogue with their customers, rescheduling principal payments, advancing temporary support in the form of new loans. They are restructuring interest charges, and they're waiving fees. I believe the banks are dealing with it on a case-by-case basis, customer by customer. So I would encourage that customer to approach their financial institution, put their case forward, and put their suggestions in.
Quickly though, the way forward, is the government at this point though targeting some sectors, agriculture for example, that will be getting the priority in the recovery element of this response plan?
Well, the sector that is most affected is the tourism sector, and sectors that have linkages to tourism, of which agriculture is one, which is why the government has put forward $200 million for small farmers There are many small farmers who have crops that are going to be harvested and can't be sold to a hotel, for example. The government has put in place programs where those crops could probably be harvested and through an NGO diverted or transferred to those in need and people who need the product. At a time like this, when supply chains are interrupted and difficult, it's a time for Jamaicans to rally around and to buy Jamaican. And one of the things that we can certainly do is to shift our food consumption habits to the things that we grow here locally.
Yeah, but am I hearing you're saying that the government has a strategy that is looking at certain sectors as priority for the recovery a few months down the road?
I'm saying to you that yes, we are looking at how we can help sectors recover. At the moment, though, Damien, you will understand that our focus is, intervention to help cushion the effect of the crisis, and we are at that stage. So I don't want to get too far
understand,
ahead.
Though, but we are expecting the recovery, and I think it's important to begin the planning for that recovery from now. So the specific question, though, is whether the government has a strategy and has picked the 3 or 4 or 5 sectors that will be getting the priority to assist with the recovery.
Yeah, I would say to you that, tourism, let's put it this way. The reason why we've intervened in the way that I've described with the Best Cash program is to ensure or to give the best chance that companies in the sectors that are hardest hit remain connected to their employees. If companies are connected to their employees, then when the recovery comes, Jamaica can be among the first to restart. If you're disconnected from your employees and you have to rehire and potentially retrain because you get in a different group of people, then an additional 4 weeks or 6 weeks vis-a-vis another country puts you behind. And it's 4 more weeks in a laggard or slow environment. By supporting companies in the tourism sector with transfers of cash, we are incentivizing them to remain connected with their employees. And that's a part of our recovery plan, because when the storm passes, their payroll is intact, they just call everybody up to come back to work.
Do you have a recovery team? That's the health ministry has appointed an advisory team which is external to health officials, but do you have, as a government, as a finance ministry, a recovery team that's coming together?
We are working. Look, you asked me before I came here, how has it been? And I said to you, non-stop, literally. We are in touch with a vast number of persons from a vast number of sectors, public and private, who are making contributions and submitting ideas. That's the only way to go forward, and that's why we've been able to stay, so far we've been able to stay ahead, and we will continue to take that approach, an inclusive approach that takes the opinions and contributions of a vast number of persons.
Entirely out of time, Dr. Nigel Clarke, Minister of Finance and Public Service, I want to say thank you so very much for having made it here at the Gleaner for this special COVID-19 Editors Forum series. I'm Damien Mitchell.